Tonight's education will be done by Chris Kelly, who is a windlass, who has been a member of Windlasses for what, about 5 years now?
Oh, longer than that, 2014.
14, okay. And she is going to provide a little bit more information about her sailing background to you.
Okay, well, as Janet said, I'm Chris, and I neglected to send Janet my bio, so I have to do it myself, even though she asked me twice, apparently. But anyway, I've been sailing since I was a little kid, but more cruising with my family. I come from a sailing family and grew up in City Island, New York, which is an island on the east tip of the Bronx where the East River empties out into Long Island Sound. It's a big sailing area. Some of the America Cup boats were built there. And then I taught sailing in City Island with Offshore Sailing School for a while, and just did some PHRF racing. But the bulk of my racing was after I moved to Florida. I did windsurfing and then raced in the day sailor class and then with the windlasses. So as far as this, I'm not exactly going to call it an education. I'm going to call it a sharing of ideas from information gathered through reading stuff, through the seminars from the pros we've heard lately, from our heated discussions after our racing with the other sailors. That's a really big one. And then my personal experience on the race course in smaller races and larger races, right? The topic Janet had asked me to cover was rounding the leeward mark and then on to the finish. So that's where we're going to go. If you could look right here, I have the race committee boat, the start and the finish line, and then the leeward mark down there. And the black line just indicates the bulk of what the emphasis is going to be on. So we're going to talk about the last leeward mark to the finish and some of the things that you end up encountering. And there's pretty much 3 components to it. Some of the things that happen once you get to the windward mark, you go around the windward mark and you're way ahead, and you get down to the leeward mark and you say, "What? How did everybody pass me? I was way ahead at the windward mark." So that's something you want to think about. Another thing is, once you're down there, how can you get around the leeward mark ahead of another boat or without losing a boat? And then another component is, how can I beat the boat that rounded the leeward mark just ahead of me? And then also try to make sure that the boat just behind me doesn't end up beating me. A couple of things you need to do. Here's the 3 components. You need to set yourself up on the run so you can get yourself in the best position to round the leeward mark. And we're going to talk about how to try to do that. And the other component is going to be to round the leeward mark based on that position you were able to get yourself into. You might not have been able to get yourself in the position you wanted to, so you have to make do with what you were able to do. And then the third part of it is going to be, how do you make your way to the finish? After you round the mark, who do you cover? Who do you try to pass? Who do you ignore? So this is the course that the windlasses often sail. It's not to scale, but if you can see, we call this the modified Olympic course. We've got the green boat is the RC boat, and the finish mark is in there, and the starting line is the flag. Sometimes the finish mark isn't in there until the race has already started. Sometimes it is. And then basically what we sail is we go to number 1 up at the top. We go to 2, the jibe mark, 3, the leeward mark, back all the way up to windward, back down to number 3, and then we finish upwind. Again, the emphasis we're going to put on is that last little stretch. And usually that short little upwind, it's a little bit shorter than the rest of the course. So what you do in that little short distance can end up making a difference. So we're going to talk about how you set yourself up on the downwind to round the mark. And the first thing you have to think about, well, what is your goal? What happened at that windward mark? So are you way ahead at the mark? Is your goal going to be to try to protect your lead? Or are you going to have to try to gain on another boat? Are you a little behind? Or the other thing is it's just to get around the damn course without hitting or fouling anyone. That's not the worst goal in the world for some people. If you're new to it, you don't want to get anybody mad, you just want to go out there and try to sail the course, that's not an awful goal, but we're going to make our goals just a little bit loftier than that tonight. Right? Here's something that you're going to hear a few times about setting yourself up on the downwind. So having an inside overlap when you reach the zone is going to determine how everyone has to round that leeward mark in relation to you. Because when you are on the inside, you have inside rights. So let's get back to how you gain on the downwind for a better position. And we're going to do that one first because it is probably easier than defending your lead. And one of the reasons why it is easier is you can give them a wind shadow by getting in behind them, and that will slow them down, or it'll force them to change course to clear their air. Here's a little picture of a yellow boat giving a red boat a wind shadow. Wind is coming a little bit on a broad reach, so they sit a little bit over on the windward hip. If they have a masthead fly, you can look at their masthead fly and line yourself up with them a little bit. Right, so that's one way, is just throwing a wind shadow. It's not necessarily going to make you pass them, but it may make you get a little closer. And if your goal was to catch up a little, then that's one way of doing it. Here's another picture. In lighter air, sometimes the boats sail a little bit higher, or maybe the course isn't a true downwind and you're sailing on a reach. So if you see the front yellow boat throwing a wind shadow over to the red boat, that's a little more effective than if you were back there on the yellow boat. And the yellow boat, especially if they're coming from behind, they're going to have a little more speed. Most likely they're sailing a little higher. When they're coming from behind, they should make sure that they're at least 2 boat lengths separated from them. And that way, you know, red boat, it's not even worth to try to take them up because they're not going to reach them. And then even if they do, yellow boat probably won't have to respond very much. What you don't want to do is to get into one of these duels with one other sailor and then neglect the rest of the course, because if you guys start taking each other up, you'll watch the rest of the fleet sail nice and low and pass you all. So you want to kind of try to stay out of that situation, but throw your wind shadow, see if you can pass them and move on. And in heavier air, your wind shadow doesn't go as far. So you'll need to get a lot closer to the boat in front of you. And in heavier air, people are usually sailing downwind a little bit more direction. So if you set yourself up a little bit on their leeward hip, the only thing you're going to force them to do if they want to get out of your wind shadow might be to head up a little. And then you could head low, which is not slow in heavy air, and then get on the inside. So those are a couple of ways that you can give a wind shadow to try to catch up when you're a little bit behind. See that yellow boat that just popped in? You don't want to be over there on their windward hip because that gives them the freedom to bear down, get out of your wind shadow, and get on the inside. So another thing is it's a lot easier to watch the boats ahead of you than it is to watch the boats behind you. You don't have to turn around. You can see what they're doing, react to it, or at least know where they are. And then you get the puffs and the shifts before the boats that are ahead of you. So you can take advantage of those shifts by heading down if it's strong, or heading up if you have to, if it's low, and the other boats aren't going to get it till after you do. So you're going to naturally catch up if the wind is a little stronger. And then you want to take advantage and get yourself in a better position, probably by sailing low in the puffs. And the other aspect is to try to protect your lead. Protecting your lead is a little bit harder. One of the things you want to try to do is to stay between your competitor and the mark. You have to watch out for yellow boat throwing a wind shadow. So while you're staying between your competitor and the mark, try to make sure you stay out of the yellow boat's wind shadow. Again, if they start to come up on you, you may want to think about going low instead of getting into this duel of taking them higher. Unless for some reason you don't want them to pass you, then you can go up and match their speed if they're coming to roll over you. But you have to be aware that there's other boats on the course that might do better if you two get too involved. In this position, it's a little trickier. You want to pay attention to this boat behind you, the yellow boat. If they're in that position, and you're trying to protect your lead. It's okay right now, but if they end up jibing over to starboard, then you're still going to be a port tack boat and you're going to end up in a little bit of trouble. So if there's a boat, if you're both already on port tack and there's a boat coming down below you, just make sure they don't jibe over to starboard, or they're already on starboard and then put you in a port tack starboard situation. So pay attention also to the boats behind you. And then what if there's a whole bunch of boats coming down? That's really hard to protect your lead because they're throwing off all sorts of wind shadows. So the goal there is to just try to stay in the middle of the pack. But again, it's harder to avoid those wind shadows. Does Joy have something to say?
I had a question, Chris. If you do find that the boat behind you tacks over to starboard, then should you tack over to starboard?
I'm going to tell you what happened one time when I didn't tack over to starboard. We were headed towards the Leeward Mark, and it was a very competitive event. There were a lot of races, and it was the first time I was up in the top 10. I was pretty excited. And this boat comes in behind me to starboard, and it sort of was something new. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm almost at the 3 boat length. Maybe, I'll be okay. He won't get the overlap. But then he got the overlap and just came up and hit me and said starboard. So the answer would be yes. I think that once they start getting that overlap, you better get over to starboard before it's too late, or you're going to end up being protested.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, on this next picture with the bunch of boats, I think that the red boat probably should be, more towards the right rather than over toward the left, just because of what we said about being on the inside. So if you can get on the inside of the pack of boats rather than right down the middle, that would be better. But you just try to stay out of their wind shadow. It's a lot harder to do. All right, up on the top, the next one is to try to position yourself on the inside, because once again, here it is, having an inside overlap when you reach the zone is going to determine how all the other boats have to round the leeward mark in relationship to you. So in a sense, you're kind of calling the shots on what they have to do. You need to communicate to your competitors that you have an inside overlap. This happens sometimes too. You're going down, you're not in the zone yet, and the person is going, I have an overlap, and the other guy yells over, we're not even in the zone yet. That's okay. It's not a bad idea when you're coming up near the zone to let someone know you're there. That way, when you do enter the zone, they know you're already there. Communication is key. Let them know you're there. So also make a decision about what you're going to do if there is dissension. If they say, you didn't have an overlap, I'm not going to let you in. Well, you think you have an overlap, so you keep trying to go in. So you have a decision to make. Are you going to continue to try to take room and possibly have a mess and a collision at the mark if they don't give you room? And then maybe they will protest you and it's a big mess around the mark, and then you lose a lot of boats while you guys are all mashed into each other. Or do you decide to slow your boat if you have to? If you realize they're not going to give you room, go around outside them and protest them for not giving you room. That way, they can't protest you. They may realize, okay, I'll do turns because maybe they did have room and they don't want to be protested. The thing is, unless you are sure you had room, you should not protest someone. And it is if it's assumed, if there's question about whether you had room or not, it's assumed you didn't. So make sure you're sure before you protest someone for that. But it's always better to avoid the mess at the mark, go around someone, than it is to fight for a position that's only going to mess you up in the long run anyway. So we talked about setting yourself up to be on the inside when you reach the zone. We're going to say it one more time. Remember, when you're inside of the zone, that determines how others have to round the mark in respect to your position. So a couple of ways you can get yourself in a better position. I know when you hear a lot of the hotshots talk, they say you have to think 3 moves ahead, 5 moves ahead, 30 seconds ahead, 3 minutes ahead, whatever it may be. So as you, that little one up there on the left, that's the windward mark. So as you round the windward mark, the yellow boat sailed down, but the red boat went by the leaf for a minute, went really, really low, and then went down. So the red boat positioned themselves inside the yellow boat. If they can hold that position to the mark, then they've managed to get themselves on the inside. That might be a good place to be.
Chris, can you talk about how far a wind shadow goes when you talk about these boats rounding? Because there's a question in the chat.
Okay, well, it depends how much wind there is, how far a wind shadow goes. If it's very windy, the wind shadow doesn't go as far. And, you know, if it's light air, the wind shadow goes a lot further. If you look at the position of the red boat right now, the red boat doesn't appear to be in any wind shadow from yellow boat because of the direction of the arrow on the wind. I don't know if I answered that question. And as far as how many boat lengths for a certain amount of wind, I don't know the answer to that one. If anybody has that, feel free. Okay, but in lighter air, it will travel a lot further. We're going to talk about if they're thinking about hitting another boat because a boat slows down. We're going to get to that in another slide. The picture on the right shows the yellow boat comes around the mark and goes downwind. It shows the red boat decided to jibe immediately after rounding the windward mark. So they went off to the right of the course, or the left of the course going downwind, whoever what your perspective is, to get on the inside. They can always jibe back onto starboard if they want to, or they can go over more left. And it depends if people want to sail angles or if they want to sail dead downwind. All right, but those are 2 ways that you can attempt to position yourself early on the inside. All right. If this picture, I probably should have labeled the yellow boat, the top yellow boat 1, the next one 2, 3. I didn't do that. But if you don't have an overlap, how do you create that overlap if you want it? Okay, so the red boat is on the outside of the yellow boat, but decided I want to get inside. So the yellow boat is going to jibe, head up for some speed, and then come back down on the inside. And notice how we have the red boat jibing back. And the red boat, if the red boat can keep their speed up and get an overlap, an inside overlap on yellow, more power to them. But even in this position, the yellow boat is controlled by the red boat because they can't really jibe over to port because then they won't have right of way. So the red boat is kind of controlling yellow boat, and they might be able to beat them to the zone. Either way, they're not allowing them to jibe by being where they are. Time to round the leeward mark, whether you got in the position you want to be in or not, you got to deal with what you have. And you want to make sure you put your dagger board down early. Last thing you need to do is forget your dagger board, and if you have to jibe, the board's up in the way and messes you up, or you don't put it down and you slide sideways. So think about putting it down a little early. Nothing wrong with putting it down a couple of boat lengths before, or even when you reach the zone. Put it down when you reach the zone. If you are coming into the leeward mark on a starboard tack, it's best to jibe before you reach the mark rather than try to jibe while you're rounding the mark. You know, even the really hotshot good boat handlers have a harder time with that. Not only you have to jibe, then you have to get the sail all the way in and round the mark. And it's never a really pretty mark rounding when you try to do both those things at the same time. So jibe early, board down. Now, there's 2 different ways you can round the mark. I have the wind coming in from the side of the page this way so you can see it. One of them we call this strategic rounding. And you see the red boat comes in really close to the mark, and they round the mark and they kind of steer up as quick as they can up to a close haul course. When they're doing that, they have a big turn to make. So they have to try not to turn their rudder too hard or it's going to stop the boat. And if you notice, as they come out of the mark, they're a little bit further from the mark. So they're going into the mark tight and they're coming out of the mark not so tight. That's your strategic rounding. Now on the next run on the right, it's your tactical rounding. And you can see the red boat probably sails a boat length, maybe 2, away from the mark. So it comes into the mark wide, about a boat length or so, comes reaching up and then goes close hauled and comes out tight out of the mark. So the advantage to the one on the right is that they're going to be more upwind than the one that's over on the left. However, they did have to sail a little further away from the mark in the first place than the other one. If you listen to Dave Perry will always tell you to do the tactical rounding. You know, if there's nobody around, I don't know that why there's anything wrong with the strategic rounding. Try them both, see what works best for you. But if there's another boat around, I'm sure you're going to have to use the tactical rounding. That's tactics are when there's other boats around. Strategic is kind of what you do if nobody's around. What's the best way to do it? So you take your pick. Here's a rounding here. And this comes into one of the rules. Yellow boat has inside room. And yellow boat is only allowed to take as much room as the outside boat gives them. They have to give them enough room to round the mark in a seaman-like manner. So red boat's telling yellow boat, you're not going any wider, just round the mark. So yellow boat basically has to do a strategic rounding because they can't go far away from the boat, from the mark. So they come up and they round as best they can. Red boat comes in behind them. Was there any advantage to red boat doing that at all? If you look at red boat's position right there, there was no advantage for red boat to keep yellow boat in tight because now red boat is downwind of yellow boat and yellow boat is controlling everything they do until red boat maybe has to stop and tack or whatever, but red boat really can't do anything because yellow has control of them. So that really wasn't the best option for red boat to force yellow boat into a tight rounding, right? They may be able to control them all the way to the finish because remember that's the way our sail is. It's just a short little jaunt from that leeward mark to the finish. Not a lot of room to make a move. Now here's another option what the red boat might have been able to do to get themselves in a little bit better rounding position. As they come in, they're going to bear off away from the mark. And then yellow boat can take a little more room going around if they need to, but red boat goes nice and wide and goes to the stern. This is where I don't know if somebody was talking about before about a wind shadow. So red boat, when they go to the stern of yellow boat, has to make sure that they have some distance between them. Because if yellow boat stops moving or starts going slow for any reason, their wind is taken, they steer too hard, they slow their boat. Red boat, if they have too much speed, is going to crash into their stern. And I don't know, that's going to be a protest. The only way for red boat to avoid that would be to head off down underneath them. And then they're going to end up in the same position they are in the slide over on the left. So make sure red boat keeps its distance so that they don't run into the boat ahead of them. But that's kind of a better option for red to try in a situation where they're outside yellow boat. They need to think ahead. You can't just go, you need to think a couple of moves ahead. So red boat goes wide to the stern of yellow boat, not outside. And then this is just a picture of how things could possibly end up. Yellow boat, since they were in a little tighter and maybe didn't get as high, maybe they did, you know, this is just like a hopeful thing of what might happen. And red boat is above yellow boat. Red boat's still not in the best position. Yellow boat, being leeward boat, is right of way. Yellow boat could be deflecting some bad air to red boat, so red boat might be falling into them a little bit, and red boat might be able to pinch above them. But the other option is that red boat isn't stuck below yellow boat. Red boat has the option of tacking away, something that it didn't have in picture number 1. So red boat may be able to get above yellow boat or be able to tack away. First one's bad, the second one's better. Now, you got around the mark. Whether you got around the mark the way you wanted to or not, that's another question, but you sure tried. So you have to decide which end of the line do I want to finish on? Which is the shorter route to the finish line? Which end is favored? So if you look right here at this picture, you've got the race committee boat, you've got the buoy, and you've got a nice orange line showing you the finish line. And then you've got this arrow that's showing you the wind direction. So with this information, you can choose which is the end you want to finish on. So you want to finish on the end that's the downwind end, because that would be the end that's closer to you. So if you look at this picture, you can see that the wind is coming from the pin. So the pin is the upwind end. So you want to finish by the race committee boat in this picture. Unfortunately, when you're out on the water, you don't have a bright orange line showing you the finish line, nor do you have an arrow that's showing you the direction of the wind. So you have to figure that out for yourself. There's a couple of ways to do it. One way is just ignore those boats for a minute. I pushed the button early. One way is to think of the start. All right. Was the finish line down at the start, and was it lined up with the starting line? And if so, which end of the line was favored when you started? And then ask yourself, did the wind shift? So if the pin end was favored when you started and the wind didn't shift, you're going to know that the race committee boat is favored to finish, because the race committee boat will be downwind. But it's hard to tell without a compass if there were subtle wind changes that may have changed the angle. So there's a couple of other ways you can look. If you see the red boat and the yellow boat sailing according to, as best I could with that wind direction, you can see that the red boat is sailing on port tack more directly to the finish line. And then you see the yellow boat has to sail on a line, not parallel, but a little bit of a larger angle than the red boat. So the more you're headed directly to the line, if it's port, if you're on a port tack heading to starboard, then the starboard tack will be the downwind end, or the favored end to finish. That might be a little hard to tell, but tack, look at the line, if you can get a sight on it, see how well you're pointing at it. And then if you do go on the other tack, look and see how are you running on the line, and that might give you an idea. The other thing is to just try to eyeball it, which end looks closer, and go for it. Or see where the boats ahead of you went. That's always another method. Now we're just going to talk about, you've decided where you want to finish, and you're going to the finish line. And the last thing we talked about is, should you cover or should you not cover? Should you take a lift if you think you have one? Should you tack in a header, or should you cover the boat that's ahead of you? In this very short distance, it's always a good idea to cover the boat. Right here, red boat is covering yellow boat. So red boat should just stay there. And if you see the lines I put up, the red boat follows and goes all the way almost to the committee boat and decides to tack. And if you look here, they go to here. If you look from here to here, it's a shorter distance from here to here. So that just shows that it's shorter to go closer to the committee boat. So the red boat said, okay, I'm going to go this way. So watch the lines here. The yellow boat, when red boat tacked, kept going all the way to the committee boat. So right here, for some reason, red boat broke the cover. Now yellow boat goes all the way. Yellow boat tacks onto starboard. Red boat's coming in. Yellow boat has starboard advantage. Now, who knows if red boat was able to get in there or not? We don't know, but it put a question in there. Did red boat break cover and allow yellow boat to possibly win this race? The better situation, if yellow boat stayed there, would be for red boat to take them all the way to the committee boat and then tack, and yellow boat would have to tack behind them. So always cover on that short distance if you can. Here's another situation where red boat is ahead of yellow boat. Should red boat, right now, red boat might as well keep going. Yellow boat is behind them. Everything looks good. don't do anything, just stay, especially if you want to go to the race committee boat. But what happens when yellow boat decides to tack? Should red boat keep on going, or should they cover? Now, if there's other boats around, you have to think, oh, well, do I want to cover this boat? Do I want to cover that boat? If I cover them, am I going to lose another boat? So you're going to have to think about those things. But let's just look at this situation right here. So in this situation, it's probably not a good idea for red boat to let yellow boat go the other way. Because if there's any kind of wind shift in that short distance, and especially where we sail, there's tons of wind shifts, yellow boat can end up gaining if red boat doesn't cover. When you cover a boat, the red boat needs to stay in between the finish line where they're going and the yellow boat. So keep yourself in between those things. That's a loose cover where you are staying in that position, but you're not affecting their wind. A tight cover would be when you cover right, tack right on top of them, and you're affecting their wind. Tight covers, not always very good. That might come down to someone's sailing ability and boat handling, and you can get yourself messed up if you try to do a tight cover. Especially if you were doing it in this kind of wind, it wouldn't be a good idea.
Chris, there's a question in the chat regarding the difference between the favored start compared to, I'm assuming it's the favored finish end. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, please?
Yes. When you start a race, you want to try to start a race on the upwind side because it's closer to the windward mark. The more upwind you are when you start, the closer you are to the windward mark. So let's just look at the picture that's on the board. The arrow is coming from the left. So the pin is the upwind end. So you would want to start at the pin end. When you're finishing, if you're finishing upwind, you want to finish at the spot that's most downwind or most closest to you because you're downwind going upwind. So it would be the opposite if you're doing an upwind finish. Now, if you're doing a downwind finish, which happens in some places, then you want to finish on the upwind side. So if it's downwind finish, you finish on the same side you started on. And if it's an upwind finish, you usually finish on the opposite side. That is assuming the wind didn't shift. All right, so anyway, red boat decided they're going to cover yellow boat, which is probably a good decision. Here's a whole nother scenario, and it's just things that could happen. So it's things you try when you're out sailing, whatever. You've got red boat covering yellow boat, and yellow boat decides, I don't want this. So yellow boat takes a big turn and goes behind. And then there's a little more of a wind shift to the left, and red boat keeps going. Yellow boat takes the wind shift and comes up on port. And then what happens, let's just say there's another wind shift. Look where yellow boat is in relation to a red boat. And it's not super close. It's not that accurate, but it's the best we can do here. And yellow boat is on a starboard tack and has a starboard advantage. So that's just another message on it's probably a good idea to cover on that little short distance if you can. Because in the event of a shift, both boats will have to tack. And then yellow boat has the advantage. So it's just the moral of the story is when you're just trying to finish, cover the boats because anything can happen. I'm going to wrap it up. And here's what it is. You want to try to plan where you want to be. Plan ahead when you go around that windward mark. How do I want to round the leeward mark? Where do I want to be? What position do I want to be in when I round the leeward mark? And then the next thing you have to do is try to be there. Try different things to get to where you want to be. And if you don't get there, don't fret about it. Try another approach, plan B. And then this is the most important thing. Just don't worry about it and kick ass on the next race. The end.
Thank you, that was great. Going back to, how do you call it? The dirty wind, when you go downwind. Are we talking about, if it's medium to light air, are we talking about like 2 boat lengths or 5 boat lengths?
On how much the wind shadow goes?
Yes, the wind shadow, right.
You know, you're asking me a question. I would be guessing. Does anyone have a better guess?
I mean, you can guess. I just don't know. For
In
me,
medium air, I'm thinking 2 to 3 boat lengths.
okay.
but
So
I could
once
be-
we reach 4 boat lengths, the wind shadow is not a consideration.
when it's in light air, I think it still is, yeah, but not a huge consideration is my guess.
Chris,
Okay,
can I
thank
say
you.
something?
Yeah.
I think I asked Mike that question about a week ago when we had practice in medium wind. I think he said it was around 2 boat lengths.
Oh,
something
okay,
like
cool.
that. Close to
Yeah,
that.
that's what's good. If you know something, please throw something in there. Thanks, Linda. So
Yes.
did you catch that, Ivana?
Yes, thank you.
Good.
Chris,
Yeah,
also, if you can just watch and see, if you're the boat behind and you see the boat in front of you, you can see what's happening to their sails. So you can know if you're affecting them too. And if you're the boat ahead, you can feel it. So without even making the calculations, you really should start feeling it, right?
if you're the boat ahead and you're feeling it, it's too late. You needed to get out of that wind shadow.
Right, exactly. That's too
Yeah.
late.
You can
Oh,
still get out.
anyway. All right, well, I hope it helped. So I don't know who's that in that picture with sitting in that boat with their legs on either side of the boat relaxing.
Yeah, I love it. So a question about covering. So if you are the boat that is being covered,
Mm-hmm.
are there any ways to get out from being covered? Any tactics to not to get out of there and beat the other boat? Or once the other
Sometimes.
boat is starting not to cover you, that's it?
Sometimes if someone's covering you, there's nothing you can do about it. And you have to make a decision too. And is how long can you live that way, not getting good air? If you slow your boat down and tag under them, are they just going to tack and cover you again? So when you have that short little jaunt and someone's covering you, it is really hard to break that cover if they decide to keep covering you. If they don't cover you, then you have a chance. But that's why one of the things that we say is if you're ahead at that last Leeward mark, cover the boat in front of you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And my feeling is don't be covering people in the middle of a race. Just cover someone when it's relative, at a mark, at a finish. But you don't need to be covering someone when there's a big, long race ahead of you.
Thank you.
Hey, Chris, this is Charlene. I was wondering if you could go back one slide.
Oh, I don't know. Let me see.
Oh,
That one?
oh, one more slide, actually.
Oh, well, I have to go like this.
Oh, that's fine. That's it. That's it. That's the one. On the bottom, it says, in the event of a right shift and both boats have to tack, the yellow boat will now have a starboard advantage.
Right.
That was a lot for me to process. So
Okay.
maybe a little slower.
Here's
yeah.
red boat on starboard tack.
Okay.
And then here's yellow boat on port tack. This is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay. And then there's a little distance. So I kind of guessed how far it would be. So what happens, there's a wind shift to the right. That's this last wind shift right up here. Whoops.
That one. Okay.
Okay. And then yellow boat has to tack with that wind shift to the right. So yellow boat tacks onto starboard. And then red boat has to tack because if red boat kept going, they'd probably be outside the line. So red boat tacks over. Now red boat is on port, yellow boat is on starboard. So when you're going into a finish line and both boats are going to meet, it is definitely to your advantage to be on the starboard tack. Because if it's close, the red boat is going to have to go to the stern.
Got it. Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
So in this position, the yellow boat does get out of the cover by tacking.
By going, yeah, by tacking and going under red boat. And red boat probably should have tacked back and covered them, but they didn't. That was their mistake. Cover. And that last little jaunt.
Thanks a lot, Chris. That was great.
Yeah,
Okay.
Chris, thank you. This is Marty Cochran. Thanks very much. Really enjoyed
You're
it.
welcome. You're welcome. Okay.
Thank you.
Guys, thank you for attending. Chris, you did a great job.
Great job, Chris.
Great job,
Thanks,
Chris.
Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chris. Yes,
Thanks,
great job.
everybody. Thanks for the invite. We enjoyed it.
If anyone wants to do one, please get in contact with me because obviously we have the technology and we're looking for volunteers. If anybody has any suggestions on a topic, please let us know as well because we're looking to meet the needs of the group and we need information about what those needs are. Thank you very much.